Hello everyone, welcome to the internally screening review of Blood Quantum. Today we are embarking on a long journey of us attempting Hooptober 8, and the idea is we are going to be reviewing every single one of these films on this channel, putting a review out daily. Whether that happens or not is up to our own strong sense of work ethic, but we'll see what we can get done. And so today, yes, we start with Blood Quantum, which is an interesting film. It's, I think, probably the first film I've seen directed by and starring predominantly native Canadians, and it's sort of dealing quite specifically with the issues that native Canadians and I imagine Native Americans go through in relation to their sort of white neighbors, if you like. And this film sees that kind of cultural context slapped into the middle of a zombie film, which works in some ways and poses interesting questions and kind of presents an interesting scenario, but on another hand might not be as well worked into the story as they've intended. Rupert, I'm going to pass the bat straight to you. What do you make of Blood Quantum?
I thought it was very mixed. There were some elements of it conceptually and in terms of filmmaking that I thought were really, really strong and really impressed me, because it's very clear this film is working with a very minimal budget. There's a couple of faces you might recognise from bigger films in here, but there's no one. It's not like a star-led film or anything like that. The film is well made and ambitious in the right way, but kind of falls a little on the execution, and there is a few elements, particularly the script, that if refined could have led to something quite special. But I think there is quite a clear potential here with the director Jeff Barnaby and some of the actors here. But for the most part, it was a real mixed bag.
In terms of the things I liked about this film, which I will admit are kind of few and far between, I will say the cinematography I thought looked pretty great throughout. I really liked the color grading they went for. It has this kind of dark browny orange and that gray. It looks very crisp and clean, but also the set designs are very scuzzy and dirty, and I don't know, they do a lot with the lighting and everything. That's quite nice. There are some performances here and there that are decent. I don't think anything goes beyond that. And I think a lot of that's largely hindered by dialogue and writing that we will probably go into a bit later. There were some scenes I enjoyed. There's, jumping to the end, there's a very sort of tense, emotional scene where sort of two characters have to say goodbye to one another, in as least spoilery a way as possible. But honestly, I think the negatives in this film far outweigh the positives. I guess the main positive of what the film's trying to do is, as I've said before, this implementing sort of racial commentary from a native Canadian standpoint that's not something you frequently hear in most Western films, into a sort of zombie movie context. And I think it's more alluded to and gestured to than it is fully developed. They make mention of, basically, fully spoiling it, that the native Canadians can't be turned into zombies no matter if they're bitten or not, but the white people can. And so there's this kind of tension between, on the native Canadian side, where they're like, well, why are we putting ourselves at risk when these people could kill us all, and we'll all be fine if we just stayed in our own group. But I do not think that is developed anywhere near as much as it should be.
There were some cool moments. There was some quite clever stuff, there's a scene where, this is, I guess, a slight spoiler, but there's a very abrupt time jump in the film.
Yes.
Which I thought was an interesting choice, because the film really changes gears. And then there's a scene where some survivors are confronted by the native Canadians in their sort of makeshift camp. That they've set up post-outbreak. It's quite a clever moment where the guy is bringing his daughter and she's wrapped in a blanket, which is obviously a reference to when the European settlers arrived in Canada. And one of the main things they did to commit essentially a complete genocide was they figured out that they could kill a lot of natives without having to do much if they gave them blankets contaminated with diseases that the natives wouldn't have had any sort of natural immune defense system to. And that scene is probably the one that's the cleverest and consistently. There are like some other maybe more like technically impressive scenes, but
that's quite a clever, subtle reference to that as well. I hadn't picked up on that, but that is probably one of the smartest things that the film has done in terms of like cementing that racial commentary.
And then it can sort of fall to being quite on the nose, where characters will just say something like, "Oh, it's a brave new world," which feels like a little bit, I get it, type stuff. But for the most part, I was happy with how the film doesn't ever go too like excessively on the nose in a way that it could have done, but did have some sort of clever references to history within it. And for the most part, I think as a horror film, I think it will please your average horror fan in its technical proficiency. As you said, it's well shot, but the film also, I think, has really good gore, really good technical moments like that. It gets really violent, and it doesn't, for a cheap film especially, doesn't really skimp out on that. It gets quite ridiculous quite quickly.
I actually kind of disagree. I felt the film did massively kind of cop out in many places where I thought, okay, here's an opportunity for the action to really build, and I just felt in many moments there were opportunities for like more action or violence to be had, and it felt like the film was like, right, we don't have the budget for this, let's quickly cut away from that. In almost every single action scene, in my opinion, I found myself largely unsatisfied by any of the action in the film. Some of the gore was good. There was like a cool bit where he's about to get like killed by a zombie, and a guy puts a chainsaw straight through the back of her head, which is that was great. There's also like a really goofy, not really action scene, but a bit of gore where early on in the film someone's wife has had a miscarriage, during the birth, wife has died. He doesn't realise, because he's a drunk, that she is dead and become a zombie. The policeman goes into the room to see the woman just holding her baby and like eating on it like it's some like beef jerky or something, and like the way she holds the baby, it's such an awkwardly shot moment. The baby looks so fake, and then she just kind of like drops it and it squelches on the floor, and it made me like laugh and like roll my eyes, whereas everything building to that, I was like, oh no, there's this horrible scene coming up with, it's going to build something really hideous, and then it was just goofy and funny. I thought that mismatch of tones was just like really poorly handled. I just have to disagree. I think a lot of I can see that it definitely cut corners in some places, but I've seen cheap zombie films before, and I've seen them skimp out, and I don't think this film really did that. It definitely paces itself in terms of, you can tell that they probably wanted to do more, and there are some action scenes that are smaller scale as a result of that, but there's not like a single noticeable moment of CGI blood, which is always like a huge pet peeve of mine. That's fair.
Which I thought was like very commendable for a film of this budget. Not only that, but when they do include the gore, there were quite a few moments with guns. All the sound design for it I thought was pretty excellent. All Fair. Of the makeup and the gore, I just thought it was like mostly well executed. My main problem, well, there's a few problems, I'm just going to sort of move this to the writing, is essentially that I don't think the film ever really comes up with a solid set piece, and I feel like with zombie films, or with a lot of horror films in general, the strength of these kind of things can come from memorable sections. So for example, it's not really a zombie film, but it's kind of close to a zombie film. The Descent is like a very purposeful and clever film. In the first portion of the film, it sets up a lot of things, and then a lot of those things end up paying off later on. So for example, there's a point in that film where they have to go across like a real steep drop, and they have to climb across the ceiling of the cave, and then that's later brought back, and it's a very clever set piece. Whereas this film, it does that gear change thing, and it just never really settles into a flow, because the first portion of the film where you're sort of in the modern day, I suppose, it feels like it's right. I kind of felt like I knew what to expect, right? This is just going to build, and then the town's going to get overrun, and there's going to be this. And then it does the time jump, which was an interesting idea, and I'm glad the film kind of presented something that I wasn't expecting. But at the same time, it never really settles into a groove again. I agree. There are clearly ideas as to like, it just kind of felt like it was jumping from scene to scene, even when there was action happening. It felt like it was jumping from scene to scene without there being a real sense of momentum and pace to it.
Yeah, there's no. It didn't feel like there was much of like a sense of the film knew where it was going to build to. Like it more just felt like a series of sequences where some tensions were raised, but the dialogue doesn't really establish it in a coherent way. So then when the tensions do escalate, it suddenly like it feels like it's out of nowhere. And I want to talk particularly about the kind of main villain that arises out of this, which will be full spoilers, but that's like one of the most blatant core problems with the film. I will say I think the opening, whilst the most probably derivative aspect of the film, was also the smoothest in terms of where it was going. It was like, right, we need to take our characters to this point and then we cut. And so there was this nice smooth building of tension and drama. I really liked how it opened with like the fish that he's gutting start flopping around on the table. That was a nice bit of imagery. That was a cool way to open it, yeah. A quick aside, there's like this like occasional animated thing they do where like they'll just show like an animated sort of image or representation of what is happening or what is going to happen. And it was like an interesting inclusion, but it never really goes anywhere, and it only appears like 3 times through the film, and it's a few seconds each time. I thought at least it was good animation, because sometimes I've seen this happen and the animation is like pretty poor quality. Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess my frustration arises not from, you know, its inclusion, but the fact that it feels just kind of chucked in for a stylistic flavour, but nothing to further the story in any interesting way. But yeah, long and short of my rant about pacing is that, yeah, the film doesn't really have any. And the strange kind of jarring cut into like... suddenly we're in Mad Max and everyone's in like, you know, these like aggressive like done up cars and things like that. It just kind of it hits you out of nowhere and then doesn't know what to do with itself. I mean, another problem I had with the film is that I thought the acting was a bit of a mixed bag as well. You might disagree with me quite strongly here, but I actually thought his name's Kiowa Gordon. He's like the teenage bad boy type character. Not teenage. What the villain? Yeah, I actually thought he was probably the best part of the film. Oh my god! In terms of performance, I thought he was pretty good. Not agree with you less on that. I thought he's actually a pretty appalling. I thought he was pretty good. Embarrassing. He was embarrassing, man. He's actually one of the more established actors, because I know he was in the Twilight films. Right, I thought I recognised him. Yeah. He has a familiar face. I think his character, I mean, he's certainly a bit sort of Joker baby and cringy, but I think that I think that actually works well for the character, because that's kind of the point of his character. And he's like very unconvincing as a badass, and he's wearing this like ridiculous mask by the time you get to this 6-month jump. And I actually thought he did pretty well. The main person who I didn't like in the film was, I guess he's the main character. I think his name's Michael Greyeyes. You mean the police chief? Yeah, the police guy. Yeah. He just felt very like his performance couldn't really settle on either being stoic or like quite heartfelt or badass. Yeah. And there was like some, especially early on in the film, I noticed like the conversations he was having with his ex felt very stilted, awkward. Like he was still learning his lines, and it just like it could have done with like a different edit or some more takes. Yeah. And it felt like, and that's the other thing, the film never really settles on a good perspective character, because you spend so much time away from him, even though he's clearly supposed to be the main character, especially for a zombie film. Like, there's an ensemble cast, which makes sense, and it never really goes deep enough into... There's only one proper relationship that's really like thoroughly established, and that's between the two brothers. Yeah. And I just felt all of the other ones were pretty undercooked. Yes, no, I agree. I think that ties largely into like the dialogue. I think the dialogue is incredibly underwritten, exposition heavy. That kind of classic exposition where everyone tells each other what their relations are. Like, we only get along because I act out, and I wish I didn't act out, and I'm letting down my mum. And then like the non-shit brother is like talking to his like pregnant girlfriend, like, I wish I hadn't knocked you up, man, this wasn't my choice, or like blah blah blah. Yeah. It's like everything is so surface level, so all you ever get from these characters feels like just fucking bullet points. And so when anything bad happens to them, you're like, well, I guess. And that's why when the villain does his turn and he's like, he goes from spouting like, oh bro, like we shouldn't trust these people, and suddenly it goes into let's murder everyone, spoiler. It's like, oh okay, I guess we just went straight from like doing I guess edgy TikToker straight into mass murderer in the space of one scene, which is a pretty violent scene, I will give you that, where he gets his dick eaten off.
Well, I did also like, I mean, you don't like his performance, but he has like a monologue with like a flashback, which was probably the best character point in the film for me. It was probably the reason why I kind of settled on his character as one that I actually enjoyed quite a lot. It was, he has this very weird story where he talks about him having given head to some girl and then going to a police department. I don't want to spoil it. I actually thought like his motivations as a villain are pretty weak, I'll give you that, especially with like the extent that he goes to. It doesn't really feel like he's arrived organically at that conclusion given the writing of the film, but I at least felt like he had some depth, whereas a lot of the other characters, their only depth is their relationship to another character, and as I've said, they're pretty undercooked anyways, because you got police chief with his ex and bad guy's brother with his pregnant girlfriend, and then
a bunch of like other patriarchal characters as well that just kind of all haze
There's
together.
a fat guy with a chainsaw. I liked him, and I thought he was cool.
And then there was like the dad as well, like the granddad.
Yeah, he was cool as well. Like there are a few characters that are like likable, but they're not really characters. They're kind of like archetypes that would be fine as filler in a film normally, as long as you had something else. But yeah, I don't hate this film. I think it's admirable, and I think as flawed as it is, it doesn't wear out its welcome. It does certainly feel like it's kind of rushing to its conclusion when it comes to the end, but I think it ends on a pretty strong point with the boat scene.
Yeah, I would agree.
Which I thought was pretty well done.
Yeah, I thought that was my favourite scene of the whole film. Do I spoil it? I've been spoiling and you've not been spoiling. That's the problem with this review. Fuck it. Yeah, where the girl is going to die, and because she's white, but the baby won't die because, you know, it's mixed race. So it's like a kind of ticking clock of, we need to have this baby and you need to say goodbye to your child and to me, and then I have to put a bullet in your head to stop you killing us all. And there's a lot of emotion carried in that, even though, again, I don't think that the actors involved in the scene are particularly good. I think that scene has the most legitimate, genuine emotion in it. And again, well shot, well sort of orchestrated, so I'll give it that.
I just think for a low-budget film, for a start, it offers a unique perspective, which it just makes it interesting, even with the weak writing, gives it something that like I just haven't seen before.
Yeah.
I found it really enjoyable at points and really frustrating at other points, so I'd give it like a 5 out of 10.
Ooh. Well, you're not going to like my rating, Rupert.
I mean, as I said, I'm not too attached to the film. I think it's a pretty mixed bag.
I found the whole thing to be a deeply, deeply frustrating ordeal. I will say, first and foremost, is the themes that we were talking about at the beginning. There's just not enough development given to this notion that the white people... It's not that there's no development of it, because that is kind of the core of the story arc is, you know...
I'm actually glad they don't expand on that.
Well,
there's one line.
Yeah, what irks me about it is that there's this, the guy kind of goes... There's like... So one of the older characters is like says something along the lines of,
maybe nature's forgotten about us.
Yeah, maybe nature's forgotten about us. Maybe the reason that we're not being turned into zombies is this, and maybe the reason that they're being turned into zombies is because Mother Nature's found a way of using them again. And I found this sort of skirting around it very unsatisfying, because it felt like, here's a point that I think you're trying to make, and what you've done is kind of do everything you can to skirt around it. That was just deeply, deeply unsatisfying. But even beyond that, the pacing's horribly off, the acting is incredibly mixed, the writing is awful, the action is tepid and cops out far more than I would like. And yeah, it just kind of rushes to a conclusion that, while having a great final scene, a lot of the action in the build up to that final moment is just really like anticlimactic. So yeah, I would give this a 2 out of 10.
Damn. Yeah. Well, there you are. Number 1 film of Hooptober. Splitting opinions.
Yeah, finally, me and Rupert have a different opinion. Jesus Christ.
I know, it's amazing.
And I have the negative opinion.
I know.
Oh, fucking! We're in a strange, dark universe.
We're in the end game now. Yeah, you're just mad that you'd be a zombie, but yeah. unlike me, who's definitely not 200% white. So
yeah, quite.
Yeah, that's our review for Blood Quantum.
Yeah, if you like this review, stick around. We've got more reviews coming your way for the rest of this month. And if you're interested in Hooptober, then stick with us. So we'd appreciate your custom. And yeah, if you like the video, please subscribe and press like and all the good stuff. And
Hooptober list in the description. Also.
Hooptober list in description. Check out what we're going to be reviewing next. It won't be in order. It's going to be kind of like whatever we fucking feel like at the time. And yeah, if you dislike the video, dislike it, because how dare you, and it makes no difference. Algorithm and all that. We've been Internally Screening. Peace.